On today's episode of Gathering the Kings.
You're lacking, don't let that get in the way. And don't dwell on the fact, I got to get my master's, I got to get my bachelor's, I got to get this kind of financing lined up. I need to get these things in place. Just take that first couple of steps.
You are listening to Gathering the Kings with Chaz Wolfe, featuring fellow 7, 8, and even 9-figure business owners who have real battle scars from business and life, but have prevailed as the king that they are designed to be. We welcome high-performing entrepreneurs to the stage in order to reveal the real of the real on what it takes to build a successful business today. We dissect the good and bad decisions they've made along the way that give a true and accurate picture of the journey of success and how you too can get there. Through this dialogue, you will learn the value of growing your network and surrounding yourself with power players and kings like today's guest. Grab your pen and notebook because we're about to dive in. What's up, everybody? I'm Chaz Wolfe, Gathering the Kings podcast. Today, I've got Jorge Newbery on the King stage. How are you, good sir?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Chaz.
100%. I'm excited for this little get together here. Why don't you tell us what kind of business that you have?
Sure. So I run a company called American Homeowner Preservation. We own a national mortgage servicer, a national mortgage originator, pre-REO, which is a marketplace where institutions sell distressed mortgages to real estate investors on a one-off basis. We also own a title insurance company and a number of other related businesses. So we're busy. It's we've grown. We started this 14 years ago, and we've kind of evolved into what we are today.
Yeah, I love it. I love that you're in the not just the lending space, like you said, but then you've got these auxiliary businesses that go along with, or ancillary, and so. Looking forward to getting to know some of your story. I am curious about your take on the market and where we are right now. We'll probably get into some of that as well. But before we do any of that, George, I want to know what makes you tick. Like, why are you still doing this? You're 14 years in. You've had a massive level of success. Why are you doing this?
It's if you asked me 2 years ago, I said, I really like working. I do. It's like, I like accomplishing things. And I like to do things where people kind of think, no way you can do that, and prove them wrong and do it. So, sure. I mean, background, I have a GED. 14 years ago, or no, it's almost 20 years ago, I owned almost 4,000 apartments across the country. So I built quite an empire. And that was by taking risks, calculated risks, and then working really hard to make sure that they turned out successfully. But that's what I've liked. 22 months ago, my life was changed. My life was changed a couple of times in my life, but that was a big moment in time. My wife and I welcomed twin baby boys to the world. And that really does change, or for me, let's just talk about myself. It really changed my mindset. I mean, more than anything, I want to spend time with them and teach them and guide them and support them. And it's been an awesome experience, but all of a sudden for me, it's forced me to balance my life as much as possible. It's still a little bit out of balance, but I'm feeling better as I, the weekends are really devoted to Jorge and Randy are my two boys. And that's been a transformation for me. But what makes me tick? Where are we going from here? I still have big goals, and there's one mammoth goal that we're trying to accomplish. I'm putting together and have put together a team which I can help accomplish that, and then that will really help me spend more and more time with my boys.
Yeah, I love it. Obviously, the father's heart, man, it changes everything, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs can relate to that. Mom or dad, it's the same spirit, the same heart. So. I guess I'm going to use that perspective that you've got here now, kind of maybe as a vein throughout the show, but I would love to know, before the twins, was it just like all out, just goals only, and you just had permission to do so because you didn't have that, or give me a little bit, maybe before, pre-twins.
Yeah, pre-twins. Well, I'll go to 2007. So 2007, we had extraordinary growth. It was me and about 20 people. Everybody reported to me, and I was working relentlessly. I'd get in the office probably about 9:00 on average. I worked till about midnight, and then I'd go home and I'd walk to work, and I lived and worked about 5 minutes. Workplace and home were about 5 minutes from one another. So it was really all about work, and I'd get in a workout, probably between the two. And that was it. And it was fun, and I was growing the business. But at that point, I realized, hey, this is unscalable. I'm going to, if I have to be a part of every major decision, or even every minor decision, that isn't going to work long term. And a friend of mine had shared similar challenges, and he had hired a CEO for his company, and who came from, more of a, not so much an entrepreneurial background, but more of a corporate background. And he shared how transformative that was. So I said, hey, I'm going to do the same thing. So I have, at that point, it was me in 2007. I have since changed and hired leadership. Many people that, as certainly in whatever they do, they're disciplined. They know a lot more than I do. And they come from a mindset that isn't necessarily entrepreneurial, where, we get excited about doing a deal and kind of just like focus on that deal, and everything else may not be running at optimum speed. So now we actually have an organization between all our companies is about 120 employees. And so it really has grown into a company where, we have a goal. I'll share, I shared that I have a big goal right now. I'll turn 60 in 2025. My goal is to take this company public and get us listed on the New York Stock Exchange, roll up all the individual companies into one, which we're already working on doing, and then get this listed on the New York Stock Exchange. We're not that far. I mean, I need a good downturn. All of our businesses will thrive in a downturn, and that's where we can pick up significant market share. So today is preparing for that downturn, grow significant market share, grow revenue, and that would prepare us for something in 2025, 2026, right in that area where we can actually accomplish that goal. That would be big achievement, obviously big achievement. For me, it's a big goal. And I always set these big goals and then kind of work towards them step by step. And that's how you can accomplish. I mean, in my mind, you can really accomplish anything you set your mind out to it, but you got to break it down to like all these little steps. And when you look at if you try to look at it as one big step, it's really hard to imagine, hey, can I really get this done? But if you take it step by step, you can kind of say, okay, well, I got here, and then it's, it's just taking those steps. So that's been kind of the mantra for my life. And I've done a lot of different things where, I kind of set my mind to something and then just work towards it. And it is that little breaking it down to little bite-sized pieces where you're not necessarily looking at the end goal, because that can be a little bit daunting is the right word. Exactly. It's like, oh my God, can I really ever get there? And certainly, this is the goal now, and everyone who comes on the team knows the goal, and we're a long way from it. We don't nowhere near the revenue that would justify that, but we think we can get there.
Yeah. I love the big goal, the mammoth goal, as you say. And then obviously just the realization of the little steps. Thank you for the reminder, because I think we all know that. We all heard it. We've all read it in a book. We've listened to it in an audio, or they've listened to it for the first time now, you saying it, but it's so simple. Like, of course, break it down, take it step by step. But it doesn't always work like that, because our brains just want to like skip over a bunch of stuff and get to the end result. I'd love to hear your thoughts maybe on that just before we transition away from the subject. Anything there that you want to give as far as our natural tendency to want to skip things?
Yeah, no, it's a step by step, everything's a cinch. That's just like someone said that like 40 years ago. And I mean, I'm sure there's other ways of saying it, but it is, or maybe it's inch by inch, everything's a cinch.
There you go.
Like that.
There you go. That's what it is.
That's the one. But either way, it's the same thing. It's just taking steps. And I'll tell you, so it's always been that way in my life with little, I'll take a goal. Okay, this is what I want to do. Let me break it down. I'll give you an example, which is kind of far-fetched, but then in my mind, I believe that I could do it. So in 1984, there was, they had the Olympics in Los Angeles, and there was a bike race, and I had nothing. I delivered papers on my bike, but I never really rode a bike seriously. But I said, hey, I'm going to become a bike racer. And a couple of years later, so I started, I bought a better bike than I had. I started riding, and somewhere I read, okay, professional bike racers ride 500 miles a week. So I started riding 500 miles a week, which is just like a huge amount of mileage. Yeah. But I said, well, that's what you got to do. And I was probably riding, I know I was riding a lot slower than any of the pros, but either way, I was putting in the work, and that was really key. And then I started riding with groups and started riding on kind of like these training rides with increasingly better riders. And then I started racing, and by 1988, I was in the Olympic trials in Spokane, Washington, and I was 42nd. They take the top 5. So I didn't get on the team, but it was, it is something where I was then on a trade team. I was riding, I raced as my livelihood. It was a modest livelihood, truth be told, but that was my life for like 5 years. And it was cool to kind of get to that, say, okay, this is what I can do, and then do it. Not quite reaching the goal, but lots of times it was close. And in my mind, it kind of, I always think that, again, I'm repeating myself a little bit, but same perspective, like we're all humans, if you decide, we all may it's easy to focus on what we don't have. I don't have a college education. Okay. I don't think I could do this, or as a result, or I don't know, I didn't start bike racing when I was, 10. I started when I was 18. And so you could look at these things, well, okay, that's why it's not going to work out. But look at what you do have. If you have the willingness is by far and away what will prevail over education, over money, over skills, training. I mean, that will I mean, you see it in sports. Sports is like the obvious one. And bike racing was great because either you were putting the work in or you weren't. And if you weren't, it was evident like, okay, this guy's out the back and he's done. So if you put in the work, it showed. And same as in business, anything, ballet, whatever the pursuit is, piano, if you put in the work, it shows and you win the race. And a lot of my life actually goes back to bike racing. But if you win the race, it wasn't because what you did that day. It's because what you did in the months and even years prior to that day. And it's the same in business. Taking company public, that isn't going to be something that's going to happen like, oh, it happened. Like there's this company all of a sudden went public. It's months and years of preparation and building and building. And the reality is, or my experience for sure, and I think it is for most people, it's not like a steady growth. It's usually like a growth, and then a few steps back, and then you go again, and eventually you make enough progress so you hit the goal. But there's a lot of steps back. But bike racing was again a really good example, a really good lesson in that you learn more from your success than from your failures than your success. So every time I lost a race, every time it didn't work out, I examine and say, what could I have done better? What did the winner do that I didn't do? And how can I do that? And the same thing, what are some of the business leaders in this world doing that we can all learn from? And they all put out books. They all do talks on YouTube. The information's out there. When I was a bike racer, I was reading books like over and over to try and figure out how to do stuff. And that information's out there. It's just a matter of following it and following that guidance and taking what's helpful and figuring out what isn't.
Yeah, I would even turn what you're talking about as far as studying and preparing and all of the things that still fits into the will, right? Like if you will it, if you're willing it, then that's a great place to start. If you don't will it to happen, you're not going to spend the time searching the video or searching the book or whatever.
And watching that video like 8 times to kind of like to digest it all. Because lots of times you don't, as even books, you read them once, that's helpful, but you every time you read it or go back to certain sections, like, okay, how did this really work out? Right. And so that's my experience. Exactly.
I love it. Okay, so let's use your little platform that you've created here for us of learning from our failures and making them successes. I actually want to know of a bad decision that you made in business that we can learn from, that you learned from.
Catastrophic, colossal failure so I actually wrote a book about it. So I had a massive run of success, and it was all to do with hard work from probably my mid 20s through probably, so 1990, for the next 13 years, I had a massive run of success. So I turned 25 in 1990, got my first real job I was a bike racer still, but it wasn't making any money. I was still living in my parents' house. I was working at a bike shop. I said, okay, I got to do something different here. And one of my teammates' girlfriends always had a nice car, always seemed comfortable. So I asked her what she did, and she said, hey, she was a mortgage loan officer. So she helped me get my license and become a mortgage loan officer. Actually, I got hired at the company that she worked at when she got promoted. And a couple of years later, actually, I'd started my own company and I hired her. So, but she was really helpful. But that was the catalyst. I needed somebody to kind of show me and guide me and be there when I had questions. And once I started working, I went into the phone room. Literally, I was in a contact center, and it was just me and a handful of other people, and we were all kind of clustered together. And one thing notable back then, this is 1990, they still allowed smoking in the office. So I remember one of the guys chain smoked next to me, and it was like, I go into this thing, this bike race, and have me smelling smoke all day. It was terrible, but that's what it was. But I could hear, I was close enough to everybody that I could inhale their secondhand smoke, but also overhear all their conversations. So I just kind of I was a sponge for all this info. And, I was excited because when I first started the job, they said, okay, for the next 2 months, you get a $2,000 drop. After that, it's commission only. And it's $150 for every appointment that you set that eventually turns into a closed loan. And so I listened to everybody. And I also figured out, okay, some of these people go to lunch. Well, most people go to lunch. or go to a doctor's appointment during work hours. And I said, okay, one of the things, if I could just be here from 8 to 8, they open the doors at 8, they close at 8. I'll just be here the whole time, every single day. When I went to the restroom, I'd run to the restroom and run back, because I rapidly figured out the more calls you answered, the more you're going to close. Kind of very basic math, but it was clear that others were not as focused on that. Yeah. So basically I took all my bike racing focus, determination, and strategy and applied it to working at a contact center. So within 6 months, I was top performer. Believe me, when I started this job, I knew nothing about mortgages. I mean, I basically knew what a mortgage was, but that was it. The callers knew more than me. But every time somebody asked me a question, if I didn't know, I just say, hold on, good question. Let me ask my supervisor that, ask him. And then they give them the answer. And that way I learn. And then, okay, in my mind, and I write things down. Okay, this is what to do. And eventually I got comfortable with it. And my follow-up was just, people don't realize that the sale doesn't happen on the first call. It happens, and it's all over the internet, all over every book. It takes like 7 or 8 impressions to get a sale, but people want that first call to be the sale. And if not, they didn't follow up. I was following up incessantly. And when I followed up, I wasn't me. I'd ask, okay, you're not ready to go ahead with the loan now. When would be a good time for me to call? And they'd say, yeah, give me a call in a month. And I'd actually call them in a month. Most people didn't. So I'd actually call them in a month. It's kind of like today, I'd go on websites and fill out a contact us form, and then no one calls me. It's just unbelievable. Right. Either way. So that was my entree into business. So 2 years, I rose through that company's ranks. I became a loan officer, then the branch manager, and then I split off and started my own mortgage company. And this was, now it's like 90, that was 92. So 93, 94, the real estate market kind of got shaky in California. And there was quite a bit of a downturn. So I started buying distressed properties. And by 98, I had about 500 units in California, and the market started improving. So then I started buying outside of California. And in fact, my first big out-of-state acquisition was in Kansas City, Missouri. Nice. I bought Pickwick Plaza downtown, which is right near City Hall. It's 233 units. And then I went and I kept buying bigger. And what I would do is I'd buy the most challenging properties I could find, because they were always at a big discount. And then I would work really hard and transform them and then sell them. And I'll step back in LA, my last major acquisition, I bought 298 units in downtown Los Angeles for $850,000, which just seems, okay, that seems preposterous.
That's right. Wow.
And it was, but it wasn't because of my massive deal making or any secret deal. I'll tell you the story. So that was 98 when I bought it for $850,000. Go back about 5 years, and that same property had sold for $4 million. But the property was in such bad shape that the owner went to jail over they have a slum housing task force in LA. And the property, they gave him some orders to do some work. He wasn't able to finish it, and he got put in jail. So he sold it for $2.5 million, and that buyer went to jail. So that guy sold it for $2 million, and that buyer went to jail. So now no one wanted to buy it, because it's like, okay, buy the property equals
you're buying
going to jail.
To prison, yeah.
Yeah. So that is not a good. And worst of all, the guy that I bought it from, not only put him in jail for a year, as soon as he got released, they deported him, because he came to America with $2 million, bought this property, and then now he went back penniless and with a criminal record. So when I bought it, before I bought it, the inspectors, because I knew them from my projects, which were granted much smaller, and they said, but I bought stuff that was had code enforcement and different issues. And they said, don't buy it. We're going to end up out of scenario. Don't do it. And of course, I'm like, no, I can do this. And so I bought it.
Is the chip still on your shoulder of don't tell me I can't do it?
Yeah, exactly. That's it. So don't tell me. Yeah. I always have that telling me don't do it. And then that almost makes you want to do it more. Or better yet, he can't do it, or something like that. Someone says, there's no way this guy's going to pull it off. And then, okay, I'm going to work like crazy to make it work. So I bought it, and I met with the inspector shortly after buying it. And they said, okay, you got 6 months. We can't selectively prosecute. So you got to get this thing done in 6 months, or we have to take action like we've done against everyone else. And so I worked really hard, and they came by every single month, and they said, hey, making good progress, because I was making major progress. But on December 31st of 2008, I bought it in June 2008. A friend of mine called me and said, hey, you're in the paper. And I said, for what? He said, 34 criminal charges filed against Redondo Beach man, which turned out to be me. And I was, your heart sinks and everything. Oh, what did I get myself into? But I had made good progress. I knew they knew that. So I was granted very scared first and last, luckily criminal brush, but I couldn't reach my attorney, which was the scariest thing. So I went the whole weekend. It was a Friday. So I went the whole weekend not knowing. And, but the first thing that crossed my mind when my friend called is I lived about 10 minutes from my parents. And I thought, oh my goodness, my parents are going to read this in the paper about their son. I can't let that happen. So it was the Los Angeles Times. So I drove over to my parents' house and I found the paper, which thankfully they had yet to open.
Swooped it up.
The Metro section was missing from that paper that day. And I walked out the door and said bye. And I didn't tell them until after this was all done, which took a little while. But the Monday, I got a hold of my attorney. He called the city attorney. The city attorney said, hey, we know he's making good progress, but we can't selectively prosecute. So they agreed that I would pay a $10,000 fine and be on probation. And I was like, oh God, I'm going to have to go like probation office every week or something like that. But they said, no, they gave me summary probation, which is the lightest form of probation, which allows that as long as you don't get into trouble, and I had 3 years where I couldn't get into trouble. As long as I don't do that, then probation's over and nothing happens. I didn't have to do any reporting or anything like that. So I agreed to the terms. I paid the 10 grand and it took me 11 more months. So I'm always, as an entrepreneur, always very optimistic. I thought I'd get it done in 6. Right. I got it done in 17. But in November, just a few days before Thanksgiving, all the inspectors came and on one day they had to go through the 298 unit property which was occupied and not find a single violation, which we had a few false starts, but that day it worked. And they signed off on it. I promptly sold the building and made over $1 million. And I said, wow, I was excited, but also it was a mixed blessing. It emboldened me. It kind of made me think, okay, I can take on any challenge, even where everybody else has failed, and I can prevail. And so that was a negative part of it. So I went to Kansas City. I bought Pickwick Plaza, where they had 8 murders in the prior year. And I moved in because mostly people thought it was admirable that I actually moved in the properties that I transformed, but actually I was kind of cheap. That was the real reason. That's the truth. Why buy in a hotel when I have like plenty of vacancies at this complex I'm working on? So I moved in. But we charted it around and it was a big success. So then I kept buying and in 2000 and shortly thereafter, I think it was 2001, I purchased one of the biggest complexes in the entire country called Woodland Meadows Apartments. It's 1,100 units in Columbus, Ohio.
Wow. And
it was nicknamed Uzi Alley because it had been just infested with drugs, gangs, prostitutes, completely out of control. And this 54 acres, 122 buildings, this massive property. And that was my biggest challenge. And I'm getting to the point because your question was, well, what was your biggest failure? So this is the run up to it. So I'll tell you what happened because it was my biggest failure and I could have done so many things differently and my life would have been different, not better, just different. Yeah, if I hadn't had this major setback in my life. So I set about executing my formula, this time on a major stage because the media was totally paying attention to this building or this complex. And so one of the things I noticed was predominantly minorities, African-American, Hispanics, tenants, and they had a 12-man, all-white security force, all armed with like security cars and stuff like that. Right. And this was causing a huge amount of friction on the property. And it was mostly their behavior. And even worse, I mean, I've never seen a property since or before or since with this one, I won't call it an amenity, but one piece, they actually had a jail on the property. What? A jail cell on the property. So the security would do citizens arrests and then take them to the security office and put them behind bars in this jail. Just extraordinary. And I remember one day I was in the security office. I was like, what? There was a young man behind in the jail cell. I said, what is this? And I own this property. What is going on here? And they said, well, no, we believe he was dealing drugs. The real police, the Columbus PD are coming over. They're on their way to take him. And I said, let him go. I said, it didn't make sense. I didn't want to be part of it. We promptly dismantled the jail. That was the end of that. But just unbelievable that was there. And that it was just like this kind of factory. Well, yeah, that's not but it was, the lack of opportunity and the massively high unemployment rate on this property was contributing. And then the aggressive policing was contributing to these elements, to this dynamic.
Hey, Chaz Wolfe here. As many of you know, I have been on an absolute mission to help entrepreneurs from all across the country in many different industries level up their game and grow their business and intentionally connect with other entrepreneurs. We do that obviously through the podcast, but we also have a peer-to-peer mastermind group specifically for 7 to 9 figure business owners. We are bringing some of the best and most successful entrepreneurs and minds together in a regular and super intentional way to not only grow our network, but to be able to leverage. And at a certain point in business, success becomes about leverage, leveraging time, leveraging resources, leveraging key relationships. This is exactly what we're doing inside of the peer-to-peer mastermind group called Gathering the Kings, specifically for 7 to 9 figure business owners. So if that's you, if you're ready to level up your 7 to 9 figure business even to the next level and get around other big hitters just like you, I want you to go to gatheringthekings.com, fill out a short application, and it'll come to an application call with me, and I want to chat with you to see if it might be a good fit. Talk soon.
And so what we did, I was scared when I made this decision because the property manager suggested it, and I was hesitant, but because it disrupts the status quo that had been there forever. But we fired all the police, all the security. We let them go all on one day, and the media, people were predicting absolute bedlam at the property, like this is going to go completely out of control,
right?
But we replaced them with a community patrol, which was made up of the tenants who wanted to make their property better. And no one was armed, and it worked. It was myself, the property manager, and first it was like 2 or 3 tenants, but soon enough, people saw, hey, they're really trying to make a change here. And that's what the majority of the people living at the property wanted, was change. Right. So they started helping out, and we made just massive progress. Within 6 months, the crime rate had dropped in half. And again, people were predicting like this is going to go berserk. And it went completely the opposite, just extraordinary. Now, we still had issues. I mean, domestic violence issues. We still had a big problem, which was on the corners in the summer nights and stuff like that. Anytime it was warm, there'd be 20, 30 young men, predominantly African-American. We go up and they just be hanging out there, and they weren't necessarily doing anything wrong, but the fact they were there, tenants would complain. They say, hey, I'm friends coming to visit. There's all these kids hanging out front. And they were kids, usually teenage or early 20s, and they're all hanging up. And so we go up to them and say, hey, can you move? And they would move, but they moved like 2 blocks away in the same property. And so it really didn't help. And I remember a common response was, well, give me a job. And we were like, I'll confess that initially just kind of like went in one ear and out the other. At the moment, I was just trying to move them and satisfy the tenant's complaint. But then we heard this often enough. We said, well, why don't we give them jobs? I mean, that's the problem. If they don't have jobs, that's why they're hanging out. And so we created a program called the Teach Program. And we told people that if you come to this program and you're on time every day for 2 weeks, we guarantee we'll give you a job. And we're figuring we're doing almost $20 million in renovations to this property. All these contractors are coming in from the suburbs into the property, getting paid, and then going back and spending the money in the suburbs. Why don't we spend some of that money to train the tenants and their families? And then that money stays at the property, strengthen those families, makes it easier for them to pay rent. And that's what we did. So the first, I think maybe 5 or 6 people showed up for the first class. They went the 2 weeks, but then they actually got jobs. And then we were pretty soon, word spread. There were like 50 people showing up. And then it was transformative because people showed up, people were wearing, baggy pants and different clothes, but pretty soon they started wearing, what they'd wear to church. And it was like wait, is this, they look completely different. And that was, and over time, the majority of the construction crews, the labor on those construction crews was made up of tenants from the property. We trained people to become men and women to become part of both the construction crews and they get education in different trades. And then they start working in the office, like leasing agents, support services, rent processing, different things like that, maintenance. And now the property was like this is run by the tenants. And it was really, really transformative, not just for the people, but for the property. And for me, just to kind of witness this and be part of it, it was really one of the most exciting periods of my life. And to see what given the opportunity that so many people who have many times been kind of written off by society, given the opportunity, which many times they aren't, but given the opportunity, a good portion of them would seize it and take a totally different path. I think the lack of opportunity for many Americans contributes to some of the issues that we have today. And, you heard in 2020, you started hearing about defunding the police. And I won't say we defunded the police, but we certainly did some of the experiment that we did had the success that people envisioned. I don't think anyone really didn't want to have police, but there needs to be a different mindset, different approach. And in this case, it worked. And I think it was transformative for me too. What happened next, we started getting media attention about, hey, what's happening at this property? And now some of these skills, and people wanted to support it. So other businesses started hiring the people, the companies. So some of these groups, as they became employees,
from,
they said,
from your training program.
Yeah, they started starting their own landscaping company and different things like that. And I remember there was an Arby's nearby, and one of the gentlemen in the program said, hey, I went to Arby's to try to get a job, and because he had a criminal record, he couldn't get a job. But a few months later, they hired him to do their landscaping, because they don't do criminal checks usually on vendors. They do it on employees. So it was eye-opening. And some of those businesses, now it's more than 20 years later, some of those people, those businesses are still around. I mean, they're still working and they've grown, which is really, truly exciting. But there's a sad end to all this story. So on Christmas Eve, 2004, that property was hit by an ice storm, which was the largest federally declared disaster in Ohio history. And our property was probably the most impacted of all. And if you can picture this, all the power went out to the property. The trees went down and knocked down power lines all everywhere. And so when that happened, when we had no power, the power to the boilers, which powered all the heat to all the units, also went down. And when that happened, because it was in the negative, I think it was about -8, all the water, both in the pipes that distributed the heat and the domestic water, they all froze. So we had thousands of families living there. We had no heat, no power, no water, and negative below zero temperatures outside. And that was truly a disaster. The whole city of Columbus was out for 4 days for power, but I shouldn't say the whole city, about more than half of the city was out. But we were one of the worst impacted. And when we came up and things warmed up, all that water in those pipes started bursting. And in the end, it was truly a tragedy. We had, the Red Cross opened up a shelter across the street at a church. We allowed people to break leases and move off the property. And it was because the first floor units in all 122 buildings were subterranean, all the water came in and flooded the first floor units across the property. And now in retrospect, I could have done a number of things. My number one, what I should have done, and it's easy to say now, is just close the property and say we're done and wait for the insurance to settle. I had more than $50 million in insurance. Eventually, that would have worked out the best, but that's not what I did. I was intent on rebuilding this property because we had so much success. And I said, no matter what, we're going to rebuild this property. And that was the tunnel vision that I had for years that got me to that point and drove my success, now drove my failure. And I did not realize at the time, but the city, this was one of the largest pieces of land in the city of Columbus. It was absolutely was well located just across the street from a brand new VA hospital, just down the street from the airport. It was out of place. We backed into Bexley, which is the highest income neighborhood in Columbus. And here we were predominantly low-income housing. So the city seized upon this opportunity to try to get rid of low-income housing at Woodland Meadows. And they did it initially. They made some overtures, which I completely went over my head. They commanded me to come to the city, bring all our financials and stuff like that. But when I went there, they basically said, hey, we'll support you if you move the tax credits that we had at the property and the Section 8 contracts will support you to move them to another property in Columbus that you have to buy. And then, we'll kind of end up with this property. And I was, no, I got to build this one. There was an undertone, which I should have picked up on. Hey, if you don't do this, they're going to knock you out. So basically that's what happened. I didn't do it. And the city found ways to basically
Undercut your efforts. Really.
undercut my efforts till they got the property, which in the end is what they did. They now own the property. I'll give you the highlights of this, or the lowlights really of this dismantling. So the first thing is the insurance company denied the claim, which is extraordinary. Now I learned that that's very common if you have a massive claim, which this was absolutely massive, that they would deny it and force you to sue. And they denied it saying, well, the reason this went down was because of the boilers, and you don't have boiler endorsements on your insurance. So as a result, you're not covered. And I was saying, there's no way. The reason the boilers didn't work is because the power went out because of this natural disaster. So my attorney said, hey, you're going to get the money. We're going to sue. Yeah, it's going to take a little while. So I made a series of mistakes. This is probably one of the biggest ones. I said, okay, well, I have all these other successful properties around the country, including Pickwick and Kansas City. I'm going to borrow money on those and use it to help fund this rebuilding effort at Woodland Meadows. And so I did just that. And at first, I thought it would be a few $1,000,000, but we spent about $5 million, and that didn't work. I mean, we were nowhere near done. And then we got to, because every time we dug, stripped out drywall, there was like more issues. And by the summer, I was into it close to $20 million in the rehab, and completely out of money and on fumes, and litigation, nowhere near at the end. And so the city pounced. What they did is they came out and they said that because we had removed all the drywall from the first floor units, which were flooded, it exposed a construction defect by a prior owner that has rendered all these buildings, all 142 buildings, subject to imminent collapse. And as a result, they issued 3-day evacuation notices in order to evacuate the property. And so I called my attorney and we came up with a plan. So we hired an engineer, and the engineer came out and did their study, and we went to court. And in court, the engineer I hired presented their findings that all the buildings are stable and not subject to imminent collapse. And so the judge looked at the city, okay, what do you have? And they didn't have anything. They had no engineer, nothing. They just said, well, visually, it looks like they're subject to imminent collapse. And so we ended up getting a temporary restraining order against the city to stop their evacuation of the property. And I mean, hindsight is kind of funny, but all the media was there, and
it's a big deal.
Yeah, it was. And so the court said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to appoint a monitor. He's going to be at the construction meetings every week and report back to us as to progress. And as long as you get this thing done in 6 months, you're fine. And so I said, okay, great. I told my attorney, call the insurance company and settle for whatever you can get, and let's get this thing done. And they settled. And this will speak to the extent of the damages. They settled, and the discounted settlement that we got was $32 million. So just a massive amount of money. But the reality is the damages were close to $50 million total. So there was a shortfall, but I said, hey, take the 32. I'll deal with that later. And so we started spending money. We're back up to like 200 people a day working at the property. But what I hadn't realized that even though the city in court was saying, okay, yeah, we'll go along with this, they had a meeting with HUD a couple weeks later, and they met with HUD and told HUD to pull my contracts. And so HUD came out and said that they said there's damage. These properties, the units aren't up to par. And they said, yes, it's because of storm damage. You can see there's hundreds of people working here trying to repair that. And so they went back to the office and they sent me a letter saying you have 30 days to fix everything. And so I went back to court and went to the judge and said, hey, here we have this big elaborate order saying that we have 6 months to fix this. Here, HUD is saying we have 30 days. And so the judge summoned HUD to court. And HUD sent word back saying we're a federal agency. We're not subject to a municipal court. We're not showing up. And so I know. And the media was like all over this thing. So what happened next is on the 30th day after that letter, HUD came out and were there for about 5 minutes and said, you're not done. I said, no, I mean, I was pleasant, but I said, I told you I couldn't get it done, but you can see all these people working. So they canceled all of our contracts, which represented, hundreds of thousands of dollars in rents every month. And that was the end. I tried to hang on, but there was no way without this. Then the city moved in, started doing their evacuation, and I had lost. And what could I have done differently? been open to the city, to maybe a different plan, different one that I envisioned, but listen to somebody else and kind of read between the lines. I was very literal and still am a bit.
Yeah.
So they say this, I'm kind of taking that as
Face value.
at its face. Yeah. Not reading into, hey, if you don't do this, this is going to be a pretty rocky road for you. So I could have done that, would have made my life a lot easier. Borrowing money in the other properties, absolutely hugest mistake in business probably of my life. If I had just let this one live or die on its own, and then each of the others, leave them alone, that would have been, I could have walked away. Even if this one went bad, I could have walked away and I'd still have everything else intact. As it is, the whole, my mini empire completely collapsed over the next few years. And this is like when the market was still super strong. It was 2004 and 2005. Everyone else is doing great. And here I was financially collapsing. I ended up
the Titanic went down.
The Titanic went down. Ended up with $26 million in debt, mostly personal guarantees that I was unable to deliver on. And from mortgages, mostly that on properties that I lost. I lost a number of properties to foreclosure. Others I sold at kind of the kind of fire sale prices. And more than anything, I ended up with, it was humbling. It was, it's definitely a feeling of failure. And constantly at that point in time, where did I go wrong? You don't like to look back and see, you want to learn from the experience, but at that point it was raw. It was like, it was tough not to beat myself. It was tough. It was just tough. Let's just say that. And then I guess even more challenging is, I tried to hide it. It's not the right word, but I tried to limit my family's exposure to my challenges. But I remember one of my cousins read this article online and forwarded to my dad. And, it was a pretty rough article about me. And that was tough to, everyone seeing me as a success, now seeing me, I won't say a failure, but certainly I had failed, no question. Yeah. And it was so colossal and so public. It really was, took its toll. And that was tough. And before that, I could get loans like so easily. And after this, I said, okay, well, I'll just rebuild. But no one wanted to make me a loan. No one would partner with me. It was it was truly a failure. So
wow.
that was my long answer to your question of my biggest failure, but that was it.
Yeah. Probably one of the most incredible stories we've had. Thank you for sharing. I don't think anybody who's listening to that is going to be upset about listening to that because, wow. We were there the entire time, like literally going with you. I was in the property. I was looking at the drywall. I was right there with you. You're an incredible storyteller. I want to know, obviously, with us kind of looking to wrap the show up here, I want to know, you started the show by saying, I'm going to take this company public in the next few years, or that's the big mammoth goal. So different from how you just left us in 2004, 5, 6, where you had nothing, nobody would, loan you anything. You, for all intents and purposes, were in such a reversed position than almost anybody listening right now, even though they've never maybe hit $1 million in revenue, or maybe they're still, a small fish. You, at that moment that you just left us at, so far behind any of these guys listening. Give us the one thing, or give the listener the one thing that you did from 2004 to now that's applicable to them as well.
It's self-belief, believing that no matter what. You always have the one thing that came out of that was my mind. So regardless, financially destroyed, credit destroyed, reputation destroyed, but I still have my mind, which had succeeded, had now had a big failure, but had succeeded. So I think again, it goes to what do you have versus focusing on what you have versus what you don't have. And at that point, I really had nothing. Again, I started out, I had a GED, so no education. And not that in the reality, that really doesn't matter. It hasn't never been an inhibitor, but I had no money. But worse than no money, because many of your listeners may say, hey, I own a couple of rental properties, or I'm just getting going. But it's worse when you have no money, no credit, no bad reputation. I had millions of dollars in judgments against me. I had lawsuits. I had tons of lawsuits against me. And so, but what in that did I still have? And really the only thing I had, beyond family and some friends, it was tough for them too. So it was my mind. And that was the one, I guess, my biggest asset, and maybe my only asset at that time. And so I think, when people say I can't do it, I think your listeners it's so easy because I get in this trap too. Well, I can't do this because I don't have that. But here I truly nothing. And now I've used my experience, and largely I've used that experience to kind of fuel my rise after that. And I'll tell you the story. You'll learn that if you share with people what you lack or what you're afraid of or what makes you vulnerable, and you're genuine and sincere about that, people relate to that. It's hard to relate to people's, well, success. I mean, it's great to hear about people's success, but really people pay more attention when you share your failures. So whatever, anyone in your audience, everybody has had challenging points in your life. And many a times, as my inclination for those first few years was, when anybody found out about it, I was like, oh, that was like a punch in the gut. Like, okay, now they've heard about all my, been exposed to all my challenges. Yeah. But now I wrote a book. It's called Burn Zones. That's on Amazon. And a lot of people support my current businesses, invest with them, whatnot, because of the challenges, it's funny. That's the complete opposite of what you expect. You want to invest in someone successful, but people relate to somebody who's succeeded, fallen, and came back. And so I think the message to your listeners is, whatever you're lacking, don't let that get in the way. And don't dwell on the fact, I got to get my master's, I got to get my bachelor's, I got to get this kind of financing lined up, I need to get these things in place. Just take that first couple of steps. Lots of times they don't require any money or very little money, and something that's within your means, and take those first couple of steps to whatever your goal is to achieving. And again, whether it's sports, whether it's family, whether it's relationship, whether it's business, it's all the same thing. It's taking small steps and getting towards whatever your goal is. And then if you're like me, the one challenge and affliction that I have, I'm probably getting a little better with now that I have the kids, but is every time I reach a goal, it's like, okay, I got to set another goal that's even more preposterous. And so it's like a never ending journey, which I guess is what life is. But I'll tell you now with the kids, and it has, again, back to what we talked about at the outset, that has been transformative. Once I hit this goal, I think I'll really I think my life can take I'll take a different vantage point, a different perspective going forward. I really, truly want to balance. And I think that's what having kids has done to me, and I think it probably does to others, is it makes you, it's a business is important, family's important, but more than any, I mean, family is the most important thing. And once you have kids, it really, for me at least, it's really, really kind of ingrained that I want it to be balanced.
Yeah, I love how you've ended this just right where we started, which is set a big goal, take some small steps. It's okay that you might feel a little scared. You may not know how to do everything. Don't skip the steps. Just take the little ones. And then what you just ended with, finally there was, the family is everything, kids and the future generations. I mean, it is literally why we exist, to procreate. I mean, biologically. So for you to be able to put that into motion emotionally now, not just biologically, but emotionally, and go, wow, this is really what life is about. And then the relationship behind it is incredible. I think it's incredible for the listener. I think that looks different for each one of us, right? Each one of our journeys. Like you just said, maybe in a couple of years when you go public with this one, it'll feel like, and then now you can do the thing with just the family. I'll like to have you back in 3 years and see if that's the case. We'll see. But the reality of it is that even through your story and then the way that you summarized everything here, it's exactly how you let us off, which as an entrepreneur myself, who's been on the up and down as well, I can see it and I go, okay, we ended exactly how we started. And therefore I know what this guy's saying is real. So from a listener perspective, how can they find you? How can they connect with you? Maybe they want to, we'll put your link to the book in the show notes, but kind of just give us a quick blurb on how they can find you and connect.
Sure. So for real estate investors, I think the most interesting company for you would be prereo.com, PREREO.com. And so you can contact me there. Also AHP servicing. And those are the best. I'm on, the social media, all the major social media platforms as well. But kind of prereo.com, and that's where we probably do our most outreach to real estate investors. So take a look at what we're doing. Connect with me. I like to talk to people. I like to share my stories and help others. Whatever their goal is. I'm hopefully today's what we shared today will be helpful towards reaching whatever goals you have.
Yeah, you've been absolutely incredible, George. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time and the story. I've been blessed today listening. I've had the front row seat, so thank you for that. We wish you absolutely nothing but success and blessing in this IPO adventure that you have. And we'll talk here hopefully soon, but at least in a couple of years to see when you hit.
See what happened. Absolutely.
Exactly. Thanks for being here.
All right. Thanks for having me on. Thanks, Chaz.
Thank you for listening to Gathering the Kings today. I hope that you were able to pull out a few nuggets to go apply into your business right away. More importantly, though, I hope that you're realizing that it takes more
to be successful than just being by yourself, doing it all on your own, carrying the weight all by yourself. What I have realized, not only in my own journey from multiple businesses and multiple different industries, and now interviewing over 200 or 300 other very successful 7, 8, and 9-figure business owners, is that it's tough to do it alone. And so Gathering the Kings exists to bring together successful entrepreneurs. In fact, we are putting together 1,000 kings, specifically who are grateful but not done. We're intentionally assembling kings who fight tooth and nail for their business, family, and communities. And here's what we believe, that in the pursuit of excellence in those areas, that it ignites within us the responsibility to govern power and forge a lasting legacy. So if that relates and resonates with you, and you know that you need people around you, sharp, qualified, other very successful business owners, I want you to go to gatheringthekings.com. I want you to take a look at what we're doing and see if it makes sense for you to be part of our pursuit to 1,000 kings. Talk soon.